Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Inanna Hamati-Ataya. I'm the founding director of gloknos, the Center for Global Knowledge Studies at the University of Cambridge. And I'm truly happy that we're finally able to welcome Sonja Brentjes today, after having had to cancel 2 of her scheduled talks in the past years, first due to the very severe weather conditions, and more recently due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So last year's exceptional circumstances seem to have become our new normal this year. I'm not sure what this says about our resilience or the general situation that we're in, but I'm very glad that our capacity to adapt to very different working conditions has brought us together despite the geographical distance. Many of you will know Dr. Brentjes as one of the leading and most productive researchers at the Max Planck Institute for the History of Science in Berlin, where she has been involved in a wide range of individual and collaborative projects, investigating the production and global diffusion of knowledge and science, especially in what Westerners call the medieval, Renaissance, and early modern periods, with a particular focus on non-Western societies of the Mediterranean and Southwest Asian world, or the Middle Eastern world. In the past few years, she has published not only on the history of science of these societies, but also on how to properly write about and engage that history, and how they themselves learned and taught the sciences over centuries. With Max Planck Institute director Jürgen Renn, she also recently edited a most wonderful volume on the globalization of knowledge in the post-antique Mediterranean, which is available in open access like all of the Institute's publications, and is likely to become a reference volume for all students in the history of knowledge and its globalization. Last year, we were looking forward to hearing about Dr. Brentjes' ongoing research on the mapping of the heavens, which is part of a wider project investigating visual and material cultures of the heavens in Eurasia and North Africa. And I still hope that we will have the chance to listen to her on this topic in the near future. But today she will talk to us about a lesser known and poorly understood 16th century cartographer called Al-Sharafi and 2 of his most intriguing maps. Sonja, it's really a pleasure to have you. Welcome again.
Thank you, Inanna, for inviting me and being so gracious to forgive that I didn't come twice. I felt very bad about that. So now let me share my screen. As I told already, Inanna, hi to everybody first. This here is a kind of little survey on a research project in which I'm engaged with a Spanish postdoc colleague since about 2.5 years. But it's more than that. It's also an effort to address some of the more theoretical issues that Inanna is taking on. And I told her I'm not a theoretician, but I'm becoming more and more actually an empiricist. And so that's a challenge today. I want to declare on the basis of this particular material, but there are other materials that I would make the same claim, that we should really guide our interpretations on the basis of an in-depth or dense, to talk with Clifford Geertz, analysis of the material that has survived, and not to take the lead from the theory and press the material into the theory box. So that's for what I want to basically achieve with the talk. So it's a mixture of these 2 things. I tell you a little bit about who Ali and Mohammed Al-Sharafi were and show you images, and then I go into what is local, what is global, what else is there, right? So what we know, and that's known for a long time, that these Sharafis lived in or close to Sfax, which is a city in southeast Tunisia today. Then it was called Ifriqiya. It is a family of 4 generations, so 4 male people are known from the extant sources who engaged in producing sea shards of the Mediterranean and world maps. But we only have 2 atlases by Ali and 1 world map, and by his son Mohammed, we have 1 world map and no other maps. From Mohammed, we have texts, but we are working, Victor, the Spanish postdoc, and we are working basically on the atlases and the world map of Ali. In difference to what previous authors have written, researchers, we do not think that we should describe the family as sea chart makers. That's not a profession in the period. It's one of their activities, and that will be one point I will stress very clearly. We see in the works of Ali that they think of themselves as broader personalities. So we really do not know in a strict sense what their professional identities were, right? At the beginning, I show you quickly a few images. I don't show you the entire works because then we are already done with the 50 minutes. Yeah, but so you have a visual impression. That's the oldest atlas that we have from 1551. And you see, despite of the awful bindings of the late 19th century French National Library, they look quite beautiful. Yeah, very colorful, lots of decoration. On the left, you see a map that we call Qibla map because you may recognize immediately the black stone in the center of the Kaaba. Around the black stone are a couple of pilgrimage sites, and in the outer ring are names of regions, names of cities from different directions of the Islamicate world. So let's generously say between India and Spain today, right? And what they tell you is in which direction the Muslim is supposed to pray in order to fulfill his religious duty. Yeah, so that's something that you find quite often as a visual element in scientific, but also in historical texts. And so we have it here in this atlas. The second one is a typical world map where you may have some difficulties to recognize what's presented. So what I usually say, try to stand on your head and then you will see what you know, namely that Europe is in the north and Africa in the south. But you don't have to do it. I tell you, the south is up and the north is down, right? So the thing that goes far to the east is Africa, Asia is above it, and on the right, there's Europe. And you see the Mediterranean connected with the Black Sea. Then you see this sort of blob to the east of the Mediterranean, that's the Caspian Sea. And the water between Africa and Asia is, of course, the Arabian Sea, the Indian Ocean, and the Pacific, right? So I'm sorry, I just see our images. And on the right, the other picture is one of these sea charts. Yeah, so they are quite characteristic for atlases. They are not characteristics for single sea charts. I show you an image later, right? And what you hopefully see, because I see Inanna and not my image, is a big flag, and this flag stands in Istanbul. So it's the biggest flag in the entire atlas, and we think this has meaning, of course. It emphasizes the role of Istanbul in the middle of the 16th century. This is the second atlas of 1571, and you see at least the colors are less vivid, and there are other symbols in there. But I took the Black Sea again, that you see Istanbul has again a larger flag, so that remains a standard message. On the left, you see in the north, so in the south, yeah, to speak in our directions, Spain and Portugal, with some weird icon. This is an interesting misunderstanding on the side of Sharafi of Granada, Muslim Granada. That's the green with the red and the two rivers. Then comes this thing that looks like a little horse for children, but it's a Sierra Nevada. It's a mountain. And up on it is something you cannot recognize. And it took us at some time to realize what it is. It's a Catholic monastery in the Nevada. So he obviously had either a source that already misunderstood the symbols, or he simply couldn't understand what was going on, right? And some of my former colleagues also didn't understand, and she thought that what the pomegranate Well, I think no, it's not a pomegranate. It's not the symbol of Granada being shown here, but it's one of these problems that we have in cultural translation. Yeah, when people translate knowledge and whatever in textual or oral or visual form, they do not always manage to understand the other side. And so here we have such an example. Now that's the last thing from Ali. That's a world map in 1579. And that's the greatest thing in the entire material. Why? Because it is really culturally extremely interesting, very innovative, and I will tell you later why. So what do Victor and I try to do? Yeah, well, we try to be different, yeah, than our predecessors. So our predecessors, for instance, criticized Ali for not including the Americas. So they described him as, oh, old-fashioned, no idea, isolated, etc. We think this is rather not the way to go about it. We go to the objects, to each little detail, and try to understand what these little details in their local context of Sfax and then the city where they moved to, Qayrawan, further in the south, are all about. Yeah, we try really to engage with the entire breadth of the material and try to figure out what it is all about, right? So that means we also try, and we take our leads from the objects, as I said, yeah. So that's why we have a regional context. We have not only the local context where the people live, but we have a regional context, and that goes to the scholarly communities, it goes social, and it goes political. And it combines rather a large region of the Islamic world, namely Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco, I take now the modern names, Spain, and the Mamluk and the Ottoman Empire up to Istanbul. That's a pretty big region, but Sharafi makes all these claims in different forms to be connected with them. Further, because of the symbolisms in the maps, we have invested quite some time to deal with military, in particular naval forces and events in the entire Mediterranean and even a little bit in the Atlantic to understand what's going politically and in terms of warfare on in the 16th century and whether that has any relationship to the things we see in the atlases or on the world map. And finally, again, inspired by what Sharafi does, beyond the synchronic approach, we go in some aspects into a diachronic approach. That is, we go back into the 12th century because from there comes what he claims is his major geographical source, namely the main work of Al-Sharif al-Idrisi, who is a famous Arabic geographer who almost everybody knows. When she goes to the internet and says Arabic mapmaking, then you get at least one map of Idrisi, right? And that goes not only on the knowledge, but in terms of geography and mapmaking, but also in the artistic aspects and in the material properties of our three objects, right? So what is the knowledge that we came with when we entered into this research? Yeah, we knew already that Sharafi's atlases and world maps are contrary to the previous main works on these materials. They are really mixed cultural products. They are not purely local products. And you can already imagine this from the list what we are doing, yeah, that they are broader than just Sfax or just Tunisia. So why did we know that? Because we knew already the main property of the sea charts that were made in the Mediterranean from the 14th to the 16th century. They are very clearly so, with no doubt, pluricultural enterprises and have a multitude of functions. Yeah, so in both cases, functions and their content, they are not local. Yeah, they are something else. They are clearly not global because there's no Chinese or Japanese element in there. But if you want to consider the Mediterranean as global, then in this context, they are Mediterranean global. Yeah. And so it's in particular, of course, my position. These sea charts reflect that there was a cultural space in this period between the 14th and the 16th century in the Mediterranean, expressed in these charts that say the Christians, the Jews, and the Muslims shared a common cultural space. They worked with materials that were accessible to all of them and made their choices, right? So that is very clear. Sharafi, as the other sea charts of this period, go clearly beyond the mere local, right? So we have compared that, of course, then with, to be brief, Christian atlases and charts, and the main important sources are Italian and Majorcan, plus in the 16th century Spanish and Portuguese. So I only show you quickly that you have a kind of visual connect with Sharafi's material. On the upper level, these are two atlases of the 14th century and of the 16th century. You see, hopefully, immediately, despite the difference in decoration, that they are extremely similar. Yeah. So the basic difference is just the alphabet, right? The one is written with Latin letters and the other is written with Arabic letters. But the content of the charts, as far as the sea and the coastlines are concerned, is basically the same. There are differences always, yeah, but there's no map that's identical with another one. But as a corpus, they are the same. And then you see a sea chart in the lower part of the slide, in difference to the atlases, and you see there's a different image. Yeah, it covers, such a sea chart usually covers parts of the Atlantic, the entire Mediterranean, the Aegean Sea, and some parts of the Black Sea or the entire Black Sea, and some exceptions go further to the east, right? And you also see that this is much richer in decoration. There's much more culture going on than in comparison to the two Italian atlases that I show you. So the upper thing is called Italian tradition and the lower thing is called Majorcan tradition. This is of course simplified, but for the purpose of the talk, that's sufficient. Here you see now an Arabic sea chart, right? This is of 1461. And again, despite the fact that there are, of course, differences, like when you look, I don't know whether you can see that. Here, the circle, this is a calendar. Can you see that? I'm not certain. Can you see when I move?
Yes, Sonja.
Okay, yeah, this is a very typical calendar in a circular diagrammatic form that you will not find on a Christian map. Yeah, but when you would go into the coastlines, you see that's Arabic, but major content and major cultural elements are very closely connected. They are the same, they are shared with the Christian ones, right? There are Jewish maps, I didn't bring one. They are basically the same. This is a late 16th century Ottoman map. Yeah, so the Ottomans also get involved in this business. The Greeks get involved in this business. Again, I didn't bring a map. This is particularly interesting. It looks very funny in some sense, yeah. And it's a total enigma because it appears to be a proper sea chart, but we have tried to identify the toponyms and we can't really figure out what he's talking about. So we don't know what that is, whether the good guy Haji Ahmed had too much wine or whatever alcohol to imbibe in, or it's a fake, but we do not know. Yeah, so it's a real challenge, this thing. What else do we have? So I'm back to 1551. There are other elements, not only the maps. And you see the cover page on the left. Some avid reader cut out the image. Unfortunately, I would have loved to know what the image is, right? And you see, perhaps, I hope so, that there is a particular type of calligraphy there, yeah? If not, you just trust me. There is a particular type of calligraphy there. Then the next one is a calendar about asterisms. They're rising, no, not they're rising, they're settings every month. And on the right is again a circular diagram, and that's about prayer times. So there are other elements of this kind. So you see a broader combination of material than only charts. That's already a particular point for Sharafi in terms of cultural translation to adapt it to his local and regional customers and their desires and what they expect in something they would buy. Now, what did we find out, Victor and I, in our research? What are the characteristics of Ali's work? So very surprisingly, we discovered a very strong feature of self-fashioning. Yeah, he is all over the place, which is pretty unusual. Yeah, Muslim authors do self-fashioning, but not in this extreme, strong, everywhere discoverable repetition. Yeah, this strong self-fashioning is expressed through strong explicit local, meaning Tunisian, southern and northern Mediterranean elements. So that's another point against the merely local, right? So what does he do? Ali places himself explicitly in the tradition of his family and the Majorcan sources that they claim to have used, which is very surprising because the atlas actually is an Italian product. Yeah, so there you have a tension of what they make explicit and what we know from the object types that they might, at least Ali must have worked with, right? Ali makes repeated references to his legal and Sufi affiliation, so we can identify some of the Sufi orders that were important in North Africa, to whom he reaches out with the authors he quotes, the formula he uses, right? Which is very interesting. He didn't have to do that. Yeah, so he clearly wants to place himself in his broader regional Muslim environment. Yeah? Then he presents himself, which is quite a norm in this period, as a very humble and a very pious person with the rhetoric he uses, but he also makes clear references to his Berber environment. We do not know really how that happens, whether he is consciously making this reference or whether this is the result of material he is using. Yeah, so whether that's an indirect impact of his local condition. And then, of course, it's this material is full of appropriation and cultural translations of the Italian atlas format into at least three different things, namely A, in terms of material or material properties, into the format of the Maghribi Quran by the sizes, very different from the Italian sizes. Yeah. Then the 1571 is clearly a translation in a school book format. So away with the Quran, going to the madrasa now. And this has consequences for the content. And then there's very clearly a connection with the so-called calendars, yeah, which contain parts of what I showed you, but which contain substantive material on agriculture and other related. It's not clear whether it's really practical or whether it's a literary tradition. It's a very difficult thing because we could not find the source. Yeah, we have found many, many different calendars and they are all really different. It's like with the maps. You find many calendars and not one is the same as the other. So that's a phenomenon we still do not understand what that means. Now, on the other side, so that's a more local and regional, now the diachronic, and perhaps in this sense more global, long-term, Sharafi places himself explicitly, yeah, very strongly, repetitively, in the tradition of the Arabic geography tradition. And so his sort of guiding icon is, as I said already, Al-Sharif al-Idrisi. And those of you who don't know anything about him, he is a Muslim. He comes from Al-Andalus, grows up in Morocco, and moves by reasons that are disputed to Sicily when Sicily is under the rule of the Christian Normans. So again, we have a break of the local, right? There are other elements, other people whom he quotes, but Idrisi is really his person, right? But then we decided in a break with our predecessors, actually really to read Idrisi and see what Sharafi is doing. And then the surprising effect is, despite the fact that he constantly says he is quoting Idrisi, he is not quoting Idrisi, he is quoting himself. So he takes Idrisi's text, pulls information out of the text, and then writes his own text. Yeah, so he's of course, constrained by the size of the atlases. He cannot simply copy the text, yeah, but he also makes content choices. Yeah, and what's the result of the content choice? He transforms the universal geography, the global knowledge of Idrisi, who really goes from China to Spain, yeah, and discusses everything. No, he cuts it down with very clear, sort of, not that he says so, but what he does in his formulations, he cuts it down to a maritime product and to the Mediterranean. Yeah, so this is impossible to read as a mere copying of some extracts of a much thicker book. Yeah, he had an intention, he had a goal, and he went for it. And that's very interesting because that makes him really an attractive person. Yeah, I don't need to have America there. I see a living local Andalusian Arab who migrated with his family at some point to North Africa, who is engaged with a lot of material and makes quite interesting things with it. Yeah, so that's not highbrow science, okay, but it's interesting. It's culturally fascinating. So what is one of the things that he does to present himself? He uses colophons. Yeah, so colophons in the Islamic manuscript tradition come at the end of a text, right? Yeah, and they tell you something about who is a copyist, sometimes who is the author, not so often, sometimes about the place, very often about the year when it was copied. Yeah? And if they are very long, then they tell you in which institution. Yeah, but at the least you get the name of the scribe and the year, right? They have different sort of formats. They can be triangular, they can be quadratic, they can be sort of in form of plant, leaves, whatever. There are no restrictions to that. Yeah. And what we see is Sharafi does that, but he uses a colophon also for other things. And I tell you more about it in a second. The Italian, Majorcan, and French atlases or sea charts of the early 16th century do not have the strong presence of authorship. Yeah, I've shown you, I will show you others. They're very thin authorial claims there, right? And they are not sort of systematically located. So there's no decision where has the authorship to be talked about. Yeah, that it can move. So Sharafi's colophons sit in between these two borderlines, right? He is Islamic, but not fully. He violates Islamic standards. He is Mediterranean, but not fully. He violates Mediterranean standards. And so we wondered what that is. And so our assumption for 1551 is because the colophon enters us on the cover page. Yeah, so this text here, this one, yeah, this is a colophon. And I wrote you the English text here. When you want to read it for a second, you can see that. I have no time to read it. So our question is this possibly an impact of early modern title pages of early modern printed books? It's very difficult to prove, that's very clear. Yeah, there may be also some kind of conversation with Maribi beginning of Qur'ans. But we tend more to the early modern. Why? Because we have the colophon and the image together, despite the fact that we lost it. Yeah. So we have here a lengthy colophon as a title page, which is totally unusual in the Islamic context. They have a very brief colophon at the end of the book. And here two images of the 15th century printed books. They are, of course, not exactly what Sharafi does, but it's very similar. Yeah? You have an image and the text. You have an image and the text. So maybe this he found fancy, and it's absolutely possible because that you have to know there's a lot of mobility in the Mediterranean. Many people from different cultures hop around under different conditions. So it's absolutely not impossible that he could have seen something like that. This is an atlas. So you would see in the 16th century in the Italian atlases or in the French atlases, you don't see cover pages, right? That's one of the very rare atlases where we have found a kind of cover page, entry title page, however you want to call it. But it's a dedication. Yeah, it's a dedication to a patron with a coat of arms. So he cannot have taken the inspiration for his rupture with the Islamic tradition from the Mediterranean, Northern Mediterranean atlases. That's simply no material for that. Yeah, and that's why our speculation, it may be some other book involved. With the school text, the 1571 atlas, you see much less engagement, but still he does a colophon at the beginning. So he must have found something valuable in placing information about himself at the very beginning of his work, right? Then we have colophons in the big world map, and Victor was so kind to highlight the color, so it stands here. What I did, I gave you the entire translation, and again, we will not read it. I color coded it. Yeah, so what you have up here in brownish color is content that is told about the map, right? Then you have in red a very brief reference to one of the sources, namely so-called nautical maps, right? So that goes to the Northern Mediterranean. And then the black is a colophon, right? This is fine because the place in a sense is fine. When you look at this sea chart here, there is a place of the authorial's position. But you may see, I hope so, this is much shorter. Yeah, it's a single line. Here we have at least 5 or 6 lines. Yeah, so he appropriates elements from the different manuscript and chart cultures and fuses them. So in this sense, Sharafi creates his own product, right? So that's still something else than local. Yeah, he tries to create something. Of course, he wants to sell it or give it as a gift. It's not for himself. That's very clear. It needs to be attractive. So it's novel. In some cultural sense, it's highly novel, this product. Yeah. But then he does at the end, on the other side of the portolan chart here of this world map, he does again an act that violates both the Mediterranean and the Islamic traditions. Yeah. So this is a block text that you find on other Christian sea charts, Jewish sea charts too. Usually they are dedicated to content. You take that from literature, yeah? You take information from books and put them on the map. He does that, he takes Idrisi, yeah? But again, I color coded it. So in this box, there is content, what is in the map. Then there's something about references. Then he makes a very short, brief statement about himself. And then he goes back to say something. This is from where we know that about his grandfather, Muhammad, and the maps he used, yeah, namely maps of the people of Majorca. And then he says his typical hostile Muslim statement, yeah, may God destroy them. The other side does the same, but you see, despite the hostility, they still cooperate. Yeah? So that's another interesting thing that you learn from such documents. And then he goes back to content. So it's a very interesting behavior to represent himself as flexible, yeah, as engaged with his material, as eager to tell you something about the material, about the sources, about himself. Good. So we conclude from that that he does not see himself merely as one person with one set of skills, but that he thinks himself, as we call that, as a multiple persona. Yeah, he has multiple skills, he has many connections, and he has a lot of outlooks in different directions. And this kind of multiplicity is also coming to the fore in the artistic elements and their different cultural backgrounds. And I hope I have a picture, yes. And you see here what usually my colleagues or predecessors totally ignore, yeah? And we spent the first, let's say 9 months just dealing with that, namely with the frame, yeah, which is untypical. Atlases of the 16th centuries on the Christian side have very few frames and no standardized frames. Yeah, here we have then knot patterns, more than one knot pattern, so variable, again, multiplicity. We have what usually is a technical thing, namely a scale for distances, but which has here also a decorative function. And then we have all these flags, yeah, with these little symbols in there on the other side too. And it took us a lot of time, and in many cases we still don't have answers to figure out what that is. So what happens in this atlas? I said already it's the emphasis on Istanbul, so it's an emphasis on the Ottomans, despite the fact that the Ottomans in this period are not yet in Tunisia. They are already in Algeria and in Tripolitania, but not in between in Tunisia. That happens only 20 years later. Some of the flags have an Arabic letter, or what we think is an Arabic letter, namely the Ha. Yeah, and this anybody who works on Islamic stuff, immediately you know this is the symbol for God is Huwa, and then you immediately know this is Sufi. Yeah, so that's a Sufi word for Sufi performative practices to get in trance and communication with the divine. And we know that this is something the Ottomans indeed did. They used either the single Ha or a double Ha for representing themselves, in particular in the army. Other flags show symbols that we found, to our utter surprise, in the highly cross-cultural geometric art of the court of Alfonso X. Yeah, and it's in particular it's the swastika, because the swastika is not a symbol found in Islamic context. It's not a local thing, but it is in the patterns of what Jewish, Muslim, and Christian artists created for Alfonso X. In this pattern book, we find the swastika and other things. There is a certain overlap with local architectural symbolism in mosque and gates, both in Qayrawan and Sfax. So you see here the multiplicity of sources that he addresses. Yeah? And this relationship to architecture is also clearly reinforced by the specific calligraphy he chose. Yeah, so at some point we thought he is a tombstone maker, because tombstone, I'll show you an image in a second, have a very similar calligraphy. Yeah, and finally, some of the flags are clearly appropriated from the Mediterranean charts. So there's a very broad and rich communication with a variety of objects. And what we think he made choices. Yeah, these are not accidental. Yeah, he did not find a single object to copy. Again, he had different things and made different choices. Why? I do not know. Yeah, this I cannot explain. But what I can figure out is that he did these kinds of choices. And here you have the images, right? Here you have a Maghribi Quran with these knot patterns. They are really specific for North Africa. We had checked lots of knots. At the end, we were kind of exhausted by knots. Right? Then you have a funeral stele of a Sufi from Qayrawan. And I'm sorry for the bad quality, but do believe me, the calligraphy is highly, we asked Tunisian colleagues, yeah, who do work on that, and they confirmed, yes, there's a very close connection in the calligraphy here. This is one of the images for Ottoman paintings of their naval forces. And some of these flags really agree with the flags in the atlases. The funny thing is, or the interesting, whatever you want to say to that, is these are all, at least what we found in terms of real surviving flags of any Islamic dynasty, they never existed. They're all painters' fantasies, right? And here you have one of the images of the Alfonso X court, and somewhere down here, yeah, here the red ones. Wait. Here, you see the swastika. Yeah. So this is so idiosyncratic that there must have been a connection between North Africa and the 13th century Christian Castilian court. This is, again, not difficult to assume because of lots of migration going on including until the early 17th century. So this is all absolutely possible. Of course, we don't have an object in Tunisia to say, yes, he copied this one. Yeah. And this one on the other side here now, it's covered by the Zoom images. So I really don't know what's on the image. I assume, I know, there are two flags. Yeah. The upper flag is with the hay, with the hoover. Yeah, this little infinity symbol Victor thought at the beginning and had lots of difficulties to make him understand that this was only invented in the late 19th century in Germany. Yeah, so it can't be infinity, what we see here. So at the end, we settled for the Sufis, right? And down here, I think, is a flag with a swastika symbol, right? Good, much shorter on the two other things. The 1571 Atlas, as I say, we think it's a creation that appeals to the group of madrasa teachers, yeah, to the upper class Maliki legal scholars. Yeah, while the 1551 clearly appeals to some other audience. And so we have a shift in A, size, B, material. We have now paper. The 5051 Atlas is cardboard. It's very rare. So it's really a special object. The content shifts to some degree, and the cultural references get different. They get more scholarly. Yeah. So you see also here he made choices. Either, I don't know, he created the atlas for his son or he sold it. At least we know that it moved. It later was in Turkish hands. Yeah, and then the 1579 world map, which I really think is a global product or a transcultural. It's it's the only product that so far I would be willing to call transcultural. And because why? It's a fusion of Idrisi's text and Idrisi's regional maps that are extant with sea charts of the Mediterranean. Yeah, and on the other hand, it's at the same time a fusion of the sea charts with Idrisi, and I will explain that. I show you some of the images. You saw the entire image earlier. It is south up, so here is the sequence of oceans to the Pacific, and Asia mainland is up here. Here's North Asia. Here in this case, I turned it around, right? That you have the kind of visual effect. Yes, I know where I am. And I still tell you because it's overloaded with symbolism. Down here you have the Arabian Peninsula, the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf and the Arabian Sea. Up here, and that's interesting because that's a clear reference to Mediterranean charts, you have the Caspian Sea. Now, I know you will not see that immediately, but it's the so-called bunny shape of the Caspian Sea. You have a little ear here, you have a little head here, and a big, big, big bunny down here. And this you find since the 14th century on the so-called Majorcan tradition. Yeah, so this is one of the many elements where he indeed fuses. We have really compared text and maps of Idrisi painstakingly with what is here. Yeah, this is a real translation of Idrisi into visual forms, and out of a sudden we get a porcelain shard element. But you also may see, I hope, so these lines here, yeah, these squares, these lines going all over the place. These are rump lines, and this is of course the pattern of a sea chart. So while he has no sea chart for Asia and for Africa, which is down here, right? He still decides to take the pattern of the sea chart as a basis of what he is doing. Yeah, and I will leave it for Asia here. This is a different photographer, so you see a nicer color picture than the other one, but it's still the same chart. Yeah, it's just the Western parchments. These are two parchments that are sewn together. Asia is on the one, and Africa, most of Africa and Europe is on this one. And here you see immediately much better the rump lines. So you have here a sea chart that he filled here in Europe, up here, yeah, with typical symbols from the sea charts. Yeah, so what can you see? You can see these green lines here with these islands. That's the Danube. you go to a sea chart of the 14th, 15th, 16th century Majorcan tradition, you will see this same symbol for the Danube. This here, you see this, I even don't have a German word for that, let alone an English one. The symbol, these are the Alps, right? You go to sea charts, same symbol. I have no idea from where it comes. Yeah, I've looked up lots of things. I cannot explain why that is. Here you have again this very weird symbol for Granada and the monastery in the Sierra Nevada. So he is also in conversation with himself, right? So Europe is to a large degree sea charts, right? Africa, again, is to a large degree Idrisi, with one exception, two exceptions, but one I cannot explain. And the other one, because I'm a little blind mouse, I cannot really see. Somewhere here is a little symbol that we also found in Pierre's naval book on the Mediterranean. So there's a little tiny conversation with the Ottomans here. Yeah. Don't ask me why, I can't tell you. So now what you have here is the same thing that a German colleague of the 1920s did in Stuttgart. He translated a couple of manuscripts, their maps and their texts from Idrisi into a map that he thought Idrisi actually had made for the Norman kings, and that is lost. And when you put them side by side with the Sharafi map, you see close similarities. Yeah. So Sharafi really did a good job, despite lots of differences. Yeah? So he is not always precise. That's not the claim. But he really was a cultural translator, transforming text and maps in a new format of a map connected with the Mediterranean tradition. So I find that marvelous, right? And if anything is transcultural, I think this is transcultural. So summarizing, I hope, I don't know where we are in time frames. Summing up, we have a strong cultural translation in the two atlases for different purposes. Yeah, so there's a very clear Italian atlas format that is the basis for the two atlases, but they are clearly strongly transformed into an African Muslim format. So this is something that we see as one of the interests that Sharafi always pursued. He wanted to produce something for a Muslim audience, right? Second, I said that already, he reshaped Idrisi's universal geography and maps into a maritime work. So he makes a content transformation with a focus on the regional, namely the Mediterranean and the Black Sea. And this is in the text accompanied by repeated references to Sufi texts from Al-Andalus, so the Muslim part of what is today Spain, and Egyptian Sufi orders. And there is a very thin veneer to the higher elite educated population with Maliki law. Yeah, so Maliki law is a law school that is dominant in North Africa, right? So that's the atlases. What happens with the world map? He deculturalizes a Majorcan sea chart format. Yeah. So the sea chart format is, between parentheses, mostly the technical format with the rhomb lines and the parchments that are sewn together. So the material also plays a role. Yeah, that's not paper, it's not cardboard, it's parchment. And parchment is rare in the 16th century in North Africa. We didn't find any real evidence for it in terms of cultural objects, not in terms of husbandry. Husbandry is very prominent. Yeah? So we do not know from where the parchments come, but we hope we can still get from Italy, where the map is today in Rome, a material analysis. And then we hopefully know from where the parchments come. Except for Europe, where he keeps the Majorcan sea chart elements, the rest is Idrisi, right? But there may be also some 16th century new Italian features, because certain elements in Eastern Europe are not any longer sea chart material. So we went through, there's a new type of map making coming up since the middle of the 16th century, starting in Italy and then going across Europe. We have checked quite a number of maps. Again, we cannot find a map that is really very close to what is in the content. It's not Idrisi, so we do not know big question marks. And I said already, minor elements from peripheries. And then what happens on, in difference really to the atlases, on the world map, there are references to politics. They are very superficial, but they are there. Yeah. So he situates himself in the world map in his time, somehow. It's not his primary goal. Yeah? His primary goal apparently really was to create a world map with as much information as possible from his own knowledge tradition fused in the map Mediterranean regional tradition, which he translates if you want to. So what happens then with the cultural translations? It's a reduction of the global to two lower levels, to the regional and the local. But on the other hand, it's also an extension of the regional to the global. These are features that come through the cultural translation of the different objects, right? It's not that he, I think, consciously wanted to achieve that. And so this is all in the framework of multiple acts of transformations of the cultural elements and of intentional acts of self-representation. So if you now know why I'm really happy and excited for the material we have, then I'm happy. And if you understand why I think it's neither local nor global, but something else for which I have no name, then we can finish and go home. Thank you very much.